Hello, this is Mr. Goldberg, and strangely, this is an article that's appearing in the New York Times Magazine on this Sunday, but it was written a couple days before that, and it's called "Building the First Slavery Museum in America," and it already has 216 comments. And what I'd like to do is go through a couple of the comments with you. Sorry about the audio that's coming up here, but just listen to a few of the comments, and then I walk you through some other details in the article. And I'm asking you to read an excerpt from the article because it's a pretty long article. If you want to read the whole thing, that's great. But for Monday, just read the paragraphs that I have selected. So let's move to the comments. So these are the comments on the article I'm going to ask you to read. And we're not going to read the whole thing, but just part of it. It's pretty long. But take a minute and pause and just read this comment here, where this man is, his wife asks whether they're servants or slaves. And I think people try to avoid history a lot of the time. And that's what I found compelling about this article. I'll assume you hit pause and read that, and I'll scroll down here. Another one from the same guy. And then I'll scroll down a little bit more so you can read more of that one. Germany does this, perhaps it will push us to do it at last, it being have a slavery museum. And then a wonderful, inspiring article. Mr. Cummings, a very remarkable person who has made possible this very important project. And then one more comment here. Right. Where are the slave cabins? Where did the slaves live? These were questions nobody wanted asked. What a joy it would be to visit a place where people actually attempt to address and discuss the darkness that is a vibrant fabric of this American life. If we can begin to talk, we can begin to proceed. And I would encourage you to look through some of the comments here. There's one last one. All the years I lived in Louisiana, I'd go to the beautiful restored plantation homes where sweet-voiced guides in hoop skirts talked about the lovely life lived when the stretch of river between New Orleans and Baton Rouge was the richest stretch anywhere in America. We talked about that in Natchez as well. But I noticed that without exception, the word slave was never mentioned. It was our servants instead. Thank heavens for this man finally telling the real story. I'm not at all surprised if his colleagues in sweet nostalgia are unsettled, and about time, too. So this is in the document I'm going to ask you to read. There's a link in the assignments page, and I sent it to you by email too. So this is a quote from the article. It's wondering if it's an art gallery or a plantation tour or a museum. It's some sort of combination of those things. It's a piece of performance art, and art makes you stop and wonder. At least great art does. So this is an article about a plantation that has been converted into a museum about slavery. And this guy right over here is the man who spent $8 million of his own money and has spent 15 years building the first slavery museum in America. And I'll just read the first paragraph here with you. Louisiana's River Road runs northwest from New Orleans to Baton Rouge. Its two lanes snake 100 miles along the Mississippi. We'll look at that on Google Earth, but it basically follows the edge of the river and through a contradictory stretch of America, flat and fertile with oaks webbed with Spanish moths. The landscape stands in defiance of the numerous oil refineries and petrochemical plants that threaten its natural splendor. In the rust-scabbed towns of clapboard homes, you're reminded that Louisiana is the 8th poorest state in the nation. Yet the lush sugar plantations that crop up every couple miles, in the lush sugar plantations that crop up every couple miles, you can glimpse the excess that defined the region before the Civil War. Some are still active with expansive fields yielding 13 million tons of sugarcane a year. Others stand in states of elegant rot, but most conspicuous are those that have been restored for tourists, transporting them into a world of bygone southern grandeur. One in which mint juleps, that's a drink, you can look it up, but it's a famous drink that people in the South would have and still do have. Manicured gardens and hoop skirts, women wearing hoop skirts, obviously, are emphasized over the fact that such grandeur was made possible by the enslavement of black human beings. And then it goes on to talk about the Whitney plantation in the town of Wallace. So let me do my Google Earth thing and show you where Wallace is located. So here's the southern United States, and this is Louisiana right here. And let's zoom in on Wallace. I'll turn off the photos. There it is. And it's right along the Mississippi. You can see some of the boats that are on the Mississippi River here. And then I looked up the Whitney plantation, and it's right there. Now we can see a little bit what this first museum to slavery looks like. Pretty big. And there's presumably a big house somewhere here. You'll read about that, and you can view the big house from the slave quarters. And so if we zoom out a little bit more here, you can see how far it is from the Whitney plantation to New Orleans. New Orleans is right over here. And if we measure it, it's about 35 miles. Hold a little thing in here. So go from Whitney plantation to New Orleans, 35 miles. And that gives you a sense of where that is. And this is the Mississippi River right here, emptying out into the Atlantic Ocean down there. So there's a reference in the article you'll read about the Vietnam Wall. If you haven't seen it before, you can Google it. But these are the names of the 58,000 plus U.S. soldiers who died in the conflict in Vietnam. And it's actually listed in the order in which they were killed. And you can see that it's black granite, and you can see a reflection of yourself in there, and it's in Washington, D.C. That's the Washington Monument there. But that's what the picture that you're going to look at is sort of based off of. So this is again in the article you'll read, and it says it was inspired by Maya Lin. She's the architect of the Vietnam Veterans Memorial, and you can see the similarities between this list of the slave names and the names of the soldiers who died in Vietnam. Sorry, so this is the last quote from the article that I'm asking you to read, and I'll just read it to you. A nation builds museums to understand its own history and to have its history understood by others, to create a common space and language, to address collectively what is too difficult to process individually. 48 years after World War II, the U.S. Holocaust Museum opened in Washington, a museum dedicated to September 11th attacks, opened its doors in Lower Manhattan less than 13 years after they occurred. But 150 years after the end of the Civil War, no federally funded museum dedicated to slavery exists. No monument honoring America's slave. It's something I bring up all the time in my lectures, says Eric Foner, a famous Columbia University historian and author of the Pulitzer Prize-winning Fiery Trial, Abraham Lincoln and American Slavery. If the Germans built a museum dedicated to American slavery before one about their own Holocaust, you'd think they were trying to hide something. And as Americans, we haven't yet figured out how to come to terms with slavery. To some, it's ancient history. To others, it's history that isn't quite history. And again, hopefully this is compelling on some level. How do we think about slavery? And like I said, we'll talk about it on Monday. Take care.